Thanks for joining our session on how to control content creep once and for all. My name is Joe Malanchini. I manage the sales development team here at Elixir. If you have any questions during this session, please ask away in the chat. I'll be monitoring it, and we'll set aside time at the end to address any questions you might have. Our hosts for today are Brent Augustus and Greg Cheetah. Brent is on our solutions team here at Elixir. He has 15 years of experience managing business process improvements with a specific focus on digital transformations and high visibility analytics. Greg is one of our account executives with a long track record of success in the communications industry, specifically focused on building strategic alliances and helping customers navigate complex communications challenges. I'll let our hosts take it from here.
Thanks, Joe. Hey, Brent, good to see you. So I had this really interesting call the other day. The director of digital services from a Fortune 500 financial institution called me. And apparently he raised his hand when management asked if he wanted to lead a strategic initiative to modernize their customer correspondence operations. And he didn't really have any background in customer correspondence, but he thought, hey, how hard can this be? And I could tell by the time he got to us, he was neck deep in it and kind of feeling anxious. He had a lot of the same challenges that we see almost everywhere. He had legacy technology. His customer correspondence was riding on a mainframe that probably hadn't seen an upgrade in 10 years. Anytime somebody wanted to make a change to a document, they had to get IT involved. He also had multiple systems because they had acquired several companies over the last several years, including a pretty large bank. And they all brought their own systems. So he had 3 different systems, not talking to each other, legacy technology. But, I think he seemed most surprised by all the different stakeholders that were involved and that he needed to take into consideration, not just the content designers, but, the subject matter experts, the reviewers, legal, delivery, and then all the people that needed to use the system. They have over 3,000 financial consultants that needed to send out correspondence to their customers. So he was going into all these challenges, and I kind of slowed him down. I said, "So what do you think is your biggest challenge?" And he chuckled and he said, "Content creep." And I thought that was kind of an interesting term. I kind of thought I knew what he was talking about, but maybe you could explain to me and our audience, what exactly is content creep?
Yeah, absolutely. So he probably didn't know what content creep was when he raised his hand. I wonder how long before he regretted raising his hand. So content creep at a high level, it's a legitimate business need for having multiple variations of a same or similar document. So to give you a quick example, you might have 2 product lines that use pretty much the same content. Let's say, a plan document that you have to send out. So the meat and potatoes of it are pretty close to the same, but the specifics, maybe, like premium dollar amounts or something are different. And then you have the potential of, operating in regulated spaces in finance. So the regulations from state to state might change. So now I not only have 2 variations, but I could have 50 different state requirements. So now instead of just having 2 different versions, I have 100 versions. So content creep is when you have that legitimate need to have the multiple variations. It can get away from you in so many ways, though. It doesn't have to just be regulation. It could be you want a bar chart version versus a text-only version. Those are 2 different variations. So instead of having 100 documents where you potentially have to update a phone number now, that becomes a big problem, right? Which is what he's running into, is having multiple systems, multiple versions of the document.
Yeah, he kind of intuitively knew right away that, I think he said they have over 1,500 different document types or versions. And he kind of intuitively knew right away that he probably could cut that down. Now, aside from the obvious, productivity, productivity waste, having too many versions, what are some of the other negative things about content creep?
Yeah, I kind of think about these in terms of kind of three basic buckets. So one of them is the speed to market. The other one kind of goes along with that. It's the collaboration piece. So you mentioned the multiple stakeholders, especially when you're talking about corporate communications and you have multiple departments that are using communications and have these outputs. So now collaborating with different units like, the business user and subject matter experts and marketing and compliance and legal, that's a lot of people to have to coordinate making changes to a document output. So that's a really big one. And then, of course, just the nightmare of taking legacy environments where you have maybe enterprise corporations that have absorbed other companies and they have legacy systems that they're trying to graft in, and they still have to output this content. So how do you transition those onto a singular platform? Becomes a pretty challenging feat, which is what he's running into, I'm sure.
Yeah. I know we're well known for being able to drastically reduce the number of versions of a particular document. Do you have any customer examples? I mean, you don't have to name names, but examples of, we took a customer from X amount down to X amount?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because we do this all the time, right? So Elixir being a communication operations platform, that's kind of the sweet spot, is this business transformation. Can we go from these legacy mainframe systems and all of these outputs to something that's more modern? We have one client that I'm working with developing a solution right now. They have, I think, between 12 and 1,300 is the current count, total documents. When you kind of slice and dice that, they don't have, 1,000 different product areas, right? They only have a handful of products. So the plan is to actually reduce them down to about 15 core documents that can still intuitively produce all of the variations that are required to get them all of the outputs they need. But the total outputs they need isn't going to end up being, a total of 1,300 outputs. It's probably going to be more like 700 outputs that sit on these core 15 documents.
So, Tango is a, cloud-based solution, modern platform, does a lot of different things, but are you able to show how Tango addresses this particular issue?
Sure. Yeah, and whether it's Tango or another platform, I think we all kind of handle it from at least a similar standpoint. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And I'm going to share a simple use case here and kind of talk you through from the high level down into the meat and potatoes. So for the sake of argument, I'm going to use a fictitious bank statement, which we should all be familiar with. So particularly in finance, we have a lot of regulations that we have to deal with, heavily regulated space, right? So disclaimers and disclosures become a pretty big thing. Same thing in healthcare. So this statement that I have up right now has a few key areas. I want to kind of highlight. So Elixir is a CommOps platform. The way we solve this is something we call business rules. So what we do is we create a master template. So we have a single document, right? If you think about it in terms of Microsoft PowerPoint, you could have a master template, and then all of your people could have any number of presentations that they can generate, and you are confident that they're going to have the right look and feel. It's going to have the right logos in the right spots. It's going to have the right colors, the right font formats. It's going to meet, 508 compliance and everything. So that's the approach, is that if we create a central template and then we can generate multiple documents and use business rules to look for patterns of data where something has to be done, whether it's regulation or maybe it's marketing or something. So on this document that I have up right now, we have some static areas that are part of the template, like the logo that's in the upper left-hand corner. Then we have some flexible areas like the customer address block. This is coming from the CRM, so that's obviously going to be different on everyone. This marketing graphic right here in the middle is actually static, so it's going to be the same on every document. This graphic over here on the right-hand side is actually dynamic. So a business rule is picking which graphic based on a user demographic. But The case that I want to take you through is a very simple demonstration of business rules that should be familiar to pretty much the entire business world. And that's this little but mighty important spot of the document right down at the bottom, the disclaimer statement.
The fine print.
Yep, the fine print. So this is where regulation comes in. So we have a lot of design that goes into producing a document, but when it comes to simple business rules, generating a variation, like the guy that you were talking to in finance, they might have a state-by-state regulation change or a phone number or something that has to be updated. So rather than making that change on hundreds of documents and trying to keep track of which document you updated and having, some type of a massive spreadsheet, and maybe you forgot one, you were in the middle of it, having one place that you update something is key. So if I minimize this really quick, this is the Elixir CommOps platform. And how I break a project up, first we have this data layer. This is our source of truth. So this is what's connecting to the client relationship management database. So this is where all our customer information comes from. We have a couple of areas here that I want to familiarize you with because it's kind of key to understanding how we solve for this. So here in the resources folder, this is our resource library. And I have it broken up into images and RTF documents, which are Microsoft Word documents. So in the image library, I have all of the artifacts that are approved from marketing to be used on a document. So here's my logo. Here's that marketing piece. Here's the demographic marketing pieces, everything that goes into producing that document. But here in this folder is where we have the Microsoft Word document that generates the specific disclaimer statements. And that's really key. So where you might expect that, okay, if I operate 2 different product lines, I could have 2 different product folders here, right? And then for each of the 50 states, having 50 individual Word documents would still be quite a handful to be able to try and administer. So what we've done is we've made this a little bit simpler for the business user. What's more familiar to a business user than Microsoft Word, right?
So this
The
is
difference.
This is Microsoft Word that you have up here?
Yes.
Ah.
Yeah. So the difference between Microsoft Word and yours is I have a Tango tab up at the top here. So Tango is the engine that drives the Elixir CommOps platform. So I'm connected to the Elixir CommOps solution. Over here on the right-hand side is my data connector. So I can see all of the data fields that are connected to that project. So all of my customer information, I can see the credit card information, the statement dates, and all that stuff over here. On this page, you can see I have 3 example disclaimers for 3 states. So the statement that I started off with, if you noticed at the bottom, his state was Rhode Island. So it's using this disclaimer down at the bottom. But I also have California and New York here. But if I opened up an additional state, go ahead and copy that disclaimer so I have something to work from. And instead of the state of New York, I'm going to change this to the great state of Texas. And I'm going to highlight this. So for a business user, the design format that I showed you is kind of overkill. We don't want to overload them with all of the things that they could potentially screw up on the document. We want to keep it very easy and simple. So creating a business rule for a business user is done here inside Microsoft Word. And if I just highlight that section for the state of Texas, and I click on this little if button up here, I can start a new business rule. And I can choose any data field that's configured for the project. So in this case, we're going to use the state field. And I'm going to put in TX for Texas. So now if the state equals TX, it's going to use this. So in just a couple seconds, I created a new business rule. Now, if I were having to update, let's say there's a regulation change that requires me to include the phone number on all of the state disclaimers, rather than open 50 individual disclaimer files and update the phone number, I can just scan through this one document and make sure that it's changed in all of the appropriate places. So that's how I create a business rule. How I prove that that business rule is functional is another thing. So here on the Tango tab again, I have this button for rules validation. And this is where we're going to put all of the pieces together and make the magic happen. So because this is connected to the Elixir CommOps platform, it just used the Tango engine to validate the business rules. So I have the sample customer data over here, so I can see that this client's in the state of Rhode Island. And I can see which business rules are being suppressed because they're highlighted in red. And the one that's triggered is highlighted in green. So now I can see it would show up with that phone number for the state of Rhode Island. So now how, as a compliance person or as a business user, how I can continue to prove this is I advance the customer record here. And now my next customer record is in the state of New York. So now I can see the state of New York disclaimer is the one that's highlighted in green. And now Rhode Island is suppressed and highlighted in red with the others.
Wow.
So if you think about it in terms of how long it took me to create that one disclaimer, how quickly I could create 50 of them and set up those business rules, we're talking maybe an hour instead of having weeks of collaboration and individual documents and tracking spreadsheets. And it's all done in one spot. So when I'm done with this and I've proved that it's working as I expect it to work, then I can go ahead to my Tango tab and I can go ahead and submit that, and it will upload it directly back to Tango. And it starts a workflow process. So it's an approval cycle. So now I, as the business user, I've done my part. So now maybe it's a compliance person or it goes through a principal review check, whatever the individual workflow looks like. It starts that process. And when it gets to the end of it and it's finally approved to be published and used, then we schedule it to go out on like January 1st or whatever the compliance date is.
Very interesting. Certainly doesn't take IT you don't need IT to get involved. Much more modern than mainframe technology, right? And because it's in the cloud, you can work from anywhere, right? So in this COVID world that we live in now, really nice to have the ability to get at your work from anywhere. And I love the word interface because that makes it super easy. You don't have to be a programmer, right?
Yeah, so we try and follow this idea of low code, no code. So one of the other things that we do is that data picker over on the side. If you'll indulge me for a second. So this data picker over on the side, any of this information, I could actually just drag and drop directly into the document. And it would dynamically pull that field from the data file and populate it there. So instead of saying the state of Texas, I could actually have maybe 5 or 6 states that all use the same disclaimer, and I could just drop the state name right there, and it would dynamically update it. So this is a very simple case, but you can see some of the applications, like in healthcare, you could have, hundreds of business rules that determine what content needs to be used for specific health plans and which states and when it's going to trigger and why.
What's like the most you've ever heard of a document with business rules? How many business rules?
Yeah, that one's tricky. Probably the Medicare formulary document. It's got just hundreds of business rules.
Wow.
Because it's so specific and particular to, the age group and the state and what program you're enrolled in and which drugs and all kinds of things. Now, but this interface makes it really easy to be able to scroll through those business rules and make sure that the right things are happening.
Yeah, for sure. Now, where is the data coming from where I see all these fields? Is that being pulled from Tango or from CRM or? Yeah,
this is connected to the Tango engine. So whatever data is mapped to our Tango project, it could be the CRM. The client could be feeding us an XML file. It's data agnostic, so it can hook up to just about anything.
Got it. Now, we talked about using business rules in terms of like disclaimers. That makes a lot of sense. Is there any other use cases for using business rules other than sort of compliance type stuff?
Yeah, so I touched on this a little bit. So I'll just pop back over to the master document. So it could be used to determine based on, like a product, whether or not an entire page needs to be included. Based on a product code, you could determine whether or not 40 pages need to be included. My favorite one right now that we're playing with a lot this year is actually this marketing demographic business rule to determine, okay, if you're 50 years old, your retirement needs are quite a bit different than if you're 20 years old. So let's use that demographic data to determine, what marketing images or language might land better with that customer. And we'll go ahead and tag it here. And we're not only doing business rules in the document composition itself, but we have the ability to use business rules to make intelligent choices about delivering things through email and picking the right email template. Being able to determine if that email made it through to the customer or if it was rejected and it needs to be printed. So we satisfy that part of the regulation process as well.
Yeah, very interesting. I could see this, if you're a company where you're sending out monthly statements, I could see all kinds of interesting marketing use cases. They're getting the document anyways, and based on, certain demographic criteria, throw this advertisement at them and, maybe direct them to a web page or a website or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Business rules. This is a very simple use case, but it opens the door to being able to do a lot of things. And that's really at the center of how we solve that content creep problem, having dynamic templates that can create all of the variations that you need from one spot.
Yeah, well, I've heard some crazy stories in terms of how we've helped customers really take the number of documents from, some crazy number down to a dozen or so. So this is the secret
Absolutely.
sauce, business rules running in Tango. Thanks, Brett. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, no problem.
I think that's all we have. I don't know if any questions came in while we were chatting.
Yeah, guys, thanks, Brent and Greg, for taking the time to go through this. Really great stuff to see here. We had a question here. Brent, you mentioned kicking off a workflow process when submitting a new document version. What would this look like within an organization?
So, yes, it changes from organization to organization, even in the same industry. So in finance, a typical workflow would look like a business user or subject matter expert comes in and they make the proposed changes based on what compliance has told them is needed. So they make the changes. And then when that workflow process starts, it automates it. So it sends this document, like the final proposed version, sends it inside a Tango user interface to the next level of approval. So it might be a principal review agent, somebody that's licensed to be able to make that check. After they review it, then they promote it, they approve it, and it automates a task that gets delivered to the inbox of the next person in compliance. They approve it, they send it to legal. Legal approves it. Somebody does a final check, gives it the final stamp from a communication standpoint, and it's scheduled to go out the door.
Yeah, that's interesting because the gentleman that I was speaking to, he described that as a manual process. Like it gets emailed to the subject matter expert who checks it, then it gets emailed to compliance. You don't know, is it still sitting in their email box? There's no notification.
Exactly. And that's one of the interesting things is that when we come in and do some of these center of excellence transformations and we ask clients that are using legacy technology, what are you doing right now? They're like, well, we build the document in Microsoft Word and we have 25, different documents, and we look at the spreadsheet to figure out which documents need to be on which pages. And then we go ahead and we save it as a PDF and we email it out to 25 people. And there's a spreadsheet attached of who's supposed to do what when. And it's very labor intensive from a stakeholder perspective. It gets very messy.
No audit trails.
Yeah, no audit trails. In our workflow, we know who did what when.
Joe, any other questions?
Yeah, there was one more question. You guys had both mentioned talking about, document version counts and time taken to create and review documents. Are these the main ways that companies are measuring the impact on addressing content creep, or are there other KPIs that they're taking a look at?
That is a key performance indicator that we look at, is the speed to market, the collaboration time. Because when you're talking about insurance review cycles and regulation changes, these companies carve out entire blocks in third and fourth quarter to do these update cycles. And sometimes they're planning for, people being involved for weeks and months. So we have a lot of business cases that talk through that speed to market transformation. Taking things from months down to weeks is huge when you streamline that process.
Yeah, and I know in healthcare, I think we track the errata rates. We bring those down dramatically. So in healthcare, if you make a mistake, you can get fined. We track that. There's a KPI for that. But yeah, speed to market is probably one of the biggest impact ones.
Yeah, and we also look at like the net present value of whether or not you do a digital transformation or if you wait. One of the things that Greg just touched on is that compliance rate. Okay, if we forgot we have 25 documents and we only changed the phone number on 22 of them, how many documents went out the door with incorrect information that we could potentially be dinged on?
Got it. Understood. Thank you both for that. Those are the last questions we had in the chat here.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Brent, I really appreciate your time going through that. Appreciate it. Bye.